The video games industry was still young when the first true pixel art icons emerged. The Space Invader and Pac-Man were instantly recognizable to audiences beyond the gaming fanatics. As this arcade boom came to an end in 1983, the most important era for pixel art was about to start, the 8-bit and 16-bit generations. The creative talent that entered the industry in tandem with expanded memory capacity were to shape this era of pixel art, an era in which pixel art matured and quickly grew into a true art form. The early 80s saw the introduction of a host of colorful characters. However, the tile-based structure of the hardware was still very prevalent in the artwork of their games. Due to the very limited storage space, many game developers were forced to visually work within the limitations of these pixel grids, which led to a specific style featuring straight lines, usually depicting a frontal view. Capcom's 1985 hit, Ghosts and Goblins, was one of the games to break from the strict tile-based look. Game companies had begun to hire talent with backgrounds in design or the arts, even if they had little experience in game development. The artists sketched out the environments beforehand without strictly thinking within the grid-based structure. This could result in an organic world that avoided the usage of straight, flat lines. For instance, various gravestones were slanted and drawn from a 3D perspective. A stylistic point of interest in the game's graphics was the strong use of shading. It provided depth and enhanced the organic and spooky atmosphere. They were also able to provide texture even with the limited color palette. It was the mark of a true graphic artist that brought these design principles to the gaming industry, literally thinking outside the box. Drawing pixel graphics was at this point starting to become a full-time profession, demanding the talents of traditionally trained artists. It was therefore a time when many graduates from art and design academies filled in the role of pixel artist, a task that previously was often appointed to a programmer or game designer. Gaming provided a new career path for artists with a desire to work in entertainment. In this new field, they were faced with an almost blank canvas as they collectively began to define this new medium of pixel art, whether it be in video games, computer games, or the digital arts. In 1985, developers started to switch to a new generation of arcade boards. Not only were they equipped with a 16-bit processor, but also more advanced visual circuitry. The extended memory was a particular improvement for graphic designers. It contributed to the number of colors a system could store and produce. The arcade board had a master palette of over 4,000 colors, a big step up from the 256 available for Ghosts and Goblins. It allowed the designers to use colors previously unavailable and therefore opt for a more outspoken art style. Sega's new System 16 board was the ideal match for the colorful fantasy zone. This shoot-'em-up with its pastel worlds brought something new to the genre, offering a number of different game mechanics paired with its unique visual flavor. Whether it be working for the latest arcade hardware or the home consoles, hardware restrictions continued to have a big impact on the pixel artist's day-to-day work. Many were directly related to limited memory capacity. Consoles of this era had only a couple of kilobytes of VRAM to store all things related to the on-screen graphics, which added to the complexity of making interesting environments. It forced them to come up with creative solutions, from turning clouds into bushes via a palette swap, to bypassing color limitations by stacking sprites. One of the fundamentals for pixel artists was to work efficiently with color palettes. Most systems stored their runtime colors in one or more 16-color palettes. Artists could only fill them with colors a system could produce, which in the 8-bit days was often no more than 64 different shades. Because tile groups could only draw from a single palette, it was generally required to balance each sub-palette with reds, blues, and greens. In addition, many effects animations were relying on changing entries in the color palettes, further adding to the complexity. The paint tools used in this era were commonly developed in-house. Their functionality directly catered to the specifications of a given target system. Pencils and paper, therefore, remained essential throughout the whole graphics process, from sketching, drawing concept art, to logging tile sets. When it came to drawing concept art, it was important to not feel boxed in beforehand and limit visual thinking to tile grids. Pixel artists were becoming skilled in successfully translating these concept sketches to pixel art, keeping the essence of the original design. As a result, games already featured a range of organic worlds. The artists were generally trying to emulate specific styles from the analog media within this pixel canvas. They were coming up with different solutions to implement their visions within the hardware limitations, which led to a wide range of art styles. At the end of the 80s, gaming experiences on home consoles were really rivaling the arcades. One way for an arcade game to still stand out was to use large characters and visually impressive effects. In Altered Beast, the transformation was one of the hooks to attract audiences. The lead designer focused on these sequences for a month to make it a real eye-catcher. The game mechanic kept players excited, curious to explore the beastly superpowers used to fight the imposing Guardians. Arcade games could more easily show off effects animations and big set pieces thanks to their larger ROMs. The skill of the pixel artist would really shine in many of these titles. These big set pieces were also a powerful way to bring the game world to life without relying on dialogue. But the more detailed backdrops made it essential to take into consideration the readability of levels from a player's perspective. Characters and items should stand out from the backgrounds, but still feel like part of the game world. One technique was to use a narrow range of less saturated shades in the backgrounds. The darkest shade could, for example, be a medium brown. Sometimes they also applied this trick to the foreground layer. It meant favoring an artistic choice over the rules of compositing, which dictate that objects closest to the camera should have the deepest blacks. Another common trait of backdrops was to limit the use of specific set pieces to a single hue, making the games easier on the eyes despite their detail and fast action, and contributing to the artistic quality. Many contemporary arcade hits drew from pop culture or mythology in terms of theming and character design. There were also projects that went in a more distinct direction. For instance, the decision to use aquatic-based enemies provided Darius with its own strong theming. Another example was Capcom's Strider, a joint effort with Moto Kikaku, a group of famous manga artists. Strider was a game with a rich cinematic world nicely telegraphed through all the level and character design. This proper attention to the conceptual process could really define a project. The Japanese companies became top of the industry in producing pixel art, naturally drawing from their strong animation and manga influences. There were countless cases where artists who transitioned to the gaming industry had either worked in comics or animation or had been planning to in their career path. By the end of the 80s, the generation of 16-bit consoles hit the market, bringing the core graphic capabilities of the arcades from the past years to the homes. A huge improvement out of the gate was the far larger video memory compared to the previous generation, providing the developers with more room to store on-screen graphics. Color limitations were a defining feature in the look of a console's graphics. The Mega Drive and Super Nintendo had different sized master palettes. These were the colors a system could produce. The sheer number of colors the Super Nintendo could display led to a different general look compared to the Mega Drive. Artists more often drew objects with shades close to each other, resulting in a softer blend. Pixel artists working on the Mega Drive couldn't rely on such large master palette, which led to an emphasis on stronger contrasts in the visuals. But whether it be the Mega Drive or the Super Nintendo, it was the vision and skill of the artist that would still be most important to a project. The Magical Quest for the Super Nintendo featured great quality graphics, but in terms of art style, it was relatively interchangeable with other platformers. Castle of Illusion, on the other hand, had a more distinct look, with dramatic lighting and strong use of color. Referencing the classic Disney movies, in combination with some stellar implementation, its style defined a unique atmosphere among platformers. Nintendo's icons would also enter this new generation with an updated look. During the 8-bit days, director Takashi Tezuka had contributed to the pixel art himself, but with the transition to the 16-bit generation, a new group of designers were attracted to the R&D4 division. They were tasked to properly update Mario for his first entry on the Super Nintendo. What carried over was the unique look of the set pieces in Mario's adventure. It wasn't the complexity of the pixel art techniques, but rather the strong design of the environments that made the world distinct from all other platformers. The new Zelda equally showcased strong graphic design. Particularly the larger background assets like trees and buildings had their own signature look within the video gaming landscape, demonstrating the huge importance of the underlying design work. These Nintendo games featured visually appealing levels without relying on a lot of detail. While many platform games still featured cartoony-shaped heroes, there was also a trend of using more realistically proportioned characters. Large ROM sizes made it possible to use more animation frames, though it also demanded artistic skill to raise the bar. Character animation is certainly a craft in its own right that poses its share of challenges, from being able to draw the three-dimensionality of a human body to being able to let the motions flow from the personality of a character. An added challenge for artists in the field of gaming was to adapt their animations to the gameplay. This was a true balancing act to make a move feel responsive and fluent at the same time. One game where this balance was certainly well executed was Street Fighter II, among the most important releases of 1991 to push pixel art forward. The characters' moves portrayed strength as well as personality, all to enhance the game experience. Street Fighter II raised expectations in character animation. Even on home consoles where ROM sizes were still limited, the character poses were becoming more dynamic. Video games being a medium of moving objects, animation was playing an increasingly important role. Sprite artists had to create dynamic motions for their characters even if they didn't have a background in animation. Finding and creating reference material was pivotal in overcoming this challenge. Aside from character animation, effects animation also became more prevalent. This was often a joint effort between pixel artists and programmers. On some projects, it would even start to become a distinct specialization within the team. When talking about design and the look of games, contemporary trends play an undeniable role. Media of the 80s and early 90s and their visual trends were hugely influential in the video game industry, not least when it came to fashion. As a designer, your personal sources of inspiration are a big contributing factor in your work. While pixel artists were generally aware of the work being produced within the gaming industry, it was their own personal inspirations and interests that brought individuality to their works. In addition, most of the childhoods of the designers of this generation weren't defined by video gaming, leading to a rich palette of artwork created in this era. Drawing from unique sources could really shape a project. Take, for instance, the creative lead of Sonic the Hedgehog. He wanted to replicate the polygonal look of CGI. This established the unique visual flavor of the series, distinct from all other platformers. For Echo the Dolphin, the work of Czech painter and paleontologist Zdeněk Burian was hugely influential. The depictions of historical Earth life were a great artistic reference for the young pixel artist at Novotrade. His beautiful renditions gave it a painted look, matching with the atmosphere of the game, widely different from many of the more cartoony-looking games on the market. Echo the Dolphin was a game that showcased a sophisticated level of shading. It was in the early 90s that graphical advancements were greatly pushed forward by the level of artistry. Cartridge sizes were doubled compared to early in the 16-bit generation, providing these artists with more room to realize their vision. Take the Thunder Force series, for instance. Thunder Force 2 was a great-looking game at the Mega Drive launch. It followed many principles seen in pixel art at the time, taking advantage of the larger color palette to add shading via color gradients. 3 years later, on the same hardware, they incorporated far more complex texturing and shading techniques on Thunder Force 4. The artist went for a more realistic style, taking into consideration the three-dimensionality of objects and how light would affect them. For instance, whether a surface was directly lit and from what color of light source. The artists also emulated photographic properties like overexposing certain highlights and bright explosions. The attention to light, in combination with the shape of an object, carried over to the smallest details. Another big improvement was the decision to draw several bosses from a 3D perspective instead of a straight frontal view, all of which combined to make Thunder Force 4 one of the true masterpieces in pixel art. The artists for Streets of Rage also implemented a more realistic art style, one that emphasized the beauty of an urban nighttime atmosphere. It was an art style that would set it apart from most other beat-em-ups on the market. Capturing the complexity of a nighttime setting requires a great understanding of light and dark. Many of the set pieces were drawn to be unevenly lit and to reflect various hues. The opening stage nicely displays this dynamic. The cooler tint of night is combined with countless warmer hues coming from the city lights. The clever incorporation of reflections in the shop windows serves to further enhance the atmosphere. Hiding the interiors had the added benefit of being able to reuse this tiny graphics set for all store windows. To realize this realistic style on the Mega Drive required the use of dithering techniques. With a limited palette, they could create texture and hide the color limitations of the console. Some artists used dithering on the Mega Drive as a way of simulating transparency, knowing that these patterns could bleed over on a CRT. The older Mega Drive models in particular were somewhat notorious for their blurring. Several artists used this to their advantage as the 16-bit era progressed, knowing which patterns to use to successfully create in-between colors or gradients. These effects wouldn't be visible on their pixel paint tools, making it harder to successfully implement them. Pixel art was truly reaching a level of sophistication, showing all the principles of the visual arts, from the implementation of perspective, the use of specific hues to set the atmosphere, to the knowledge of lighting a scene. A challenge unique for artists in gaming was the dynamic component to their canvas. Levels could easily span across countless scenes in all directions and even feature parallax scrolling. There were still a few tricks background artists and level designers could apply to make appealing compositions. In Demon's Crest, the strong reliance on dark tones in walls and floors made for dynamic framing. It helped evoke its spooky environment. The highlights at the edges of platforms and walls made them readable for the player and heightened the nighttime atmosphere. Canopies and large foreground objects were also ways to make the framing of the area more interesting. In World of Illusion, the foreground layer greatly enhanced the atmosphere of the opening level. Combined with a strong use of shading, it made for an immersive environment. Another way to set an atmosphere was through the use of color. Rather than focusing on realism, it was about setting an interesting mood with the use of specific color combinations. Some games would really stand out for their original use of color in their backdrops. Thanks to their artistry, some of these backgrounds were successfully simulating a lot of depth and a true sense of environment while still keeping them pleasing to the eyes. These were still created using very limited graphic assets. Designers sometimes made bold decisions to incorporate big set pieces despite the strict memory limitations. The opening stage of Mega Man X, for instance, starts with a big overarching road only used once in the stage. It was drawn with a dynamic perspective, making a pleasing composition and visually leading the player into the action. It was apparent that the knowledge and skill of the artists was more important than the hardware specifications. A team member with a unique vision could really visually define a game. In some projects, it was decided to set specific boundaries beforehand. The levels in Alicia Dragoon were distinctly designed to build a unified land. They played their role to communicate the lore and history of the game world to the player. On the other hand, it was also the era in which game designers embraced the creative freedom to incorporate a wide range of fantastical levels and different biotopes. Strong design played an essential role in tying them together, but also making them different from games that had similarly themed levels. Pixel art was certainly advancing, but in a way, gaming was still an industry in transition. It was often young talent working in these development teams who were finding their own way to tackle production challenges. Specific roles like art director or lead designer weren't always as clearly defined. On Super Metroid, for instance, it was decided to spread all design duties across the team, which impacted the consistency. It was up to one of the designers to do retouches afterwards and make it a cohesive experience. Similarly, on Streets of Rage 2, the lead designer Ayano Koshiro also did various touch-ups to bring the work of the freelance artists in line. The pixel paint tools utilized by these Japanese companies had remained essentially the same, fully optimized for drawing pixel art, but less functional for free sketching. In the West, commercial tools like Deluxe Paint were popular, but there was also a rise in using additional tools and methods. 3D software and digitization, for instance, became ways of realizing a vision and setting games apart. The games that were still produced traditionally, on the other hand, would really showcase how far pixel art had come. Pixel artists were getting closer to realizing their full vision thanks to their experience and the ever-increasing memory capacities. This led to more fleshing out of details and confident, distinct art styles, as well as more sophisticated character animation. Another game to perfectly demonstrate these advances was Seiken Densetsu 3. From the attention in the design of objects down to consistent art direction, all to realize a painted storybook look despite limitations. The game's landscapes were drawn with specific lighting in mind, often taking into consideration the color temperature. In the ice fields, the shadows were all in the purple-blue spectrum, conveying the sense of cold with a touch of warmth from the winter sun. In the more tropical regions, the colors leaned towards a warmer spectrum, but the artist went even further by taking into account the blue cast from the sky, all resulting in exceptionally sophisticated pixel art. The project was assigned a massive 32 megabit cartridge, which allowed for a wide variety of major bosses and complex landscapes. Chrono Trigger similarly benefited from this large storage capacity. It made it possible to have big set pieces. On one occasion, they were even able to simulate lens distortion by drawing a tower with a curvature, a trick that was often used in the animation industry in pan shots. As the following generation kicked off, many of the strict hardware limitations were lifted. In combination with a transition to using commercial packages like Photoshop, it was a new era of pixel art. Pixel artists within the 8 and 16-bit generations had worked hard to realize their vision within their low-resolution canvas, welcoming each hardware advancement as a lifting of the compromise on their work. What actually happened was the birth of a genre in digital graphics that was here to stay. These low-resolution graphics still held relevance after the hardware restrictions were lifted. Their creativity and craftsmanship would inspire future game developers for decades to come.